He thought his life ended the day the fire took everything. But 3 years later on a desert road, 4 silent children would change everything he believed about love, family, and what it means to come home. If this story finds a quiet place in your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us. Because some stories aren't just told, they're felt. The desert didn't hum. It held its breath. Luke Monroe steered his truck across the long stretch of pale dust, his fingers resting loosely on the wheel. The sun was merciless, baking the hood of the Ford in waves of heat, warping the horizon into a trembling mirage. A dry rattle came from under the hood, louder now, then a soft choking cough, and the engine gave out. The truck rolled to a groaning halt. Luke sat there a moment, one hand still on the key, the other gripping the wheel. Sweat gathered behind. His ears dampened the back of his shirt. He exhaled through his nose, leaned forward, popped the hood. The heat slammed him when he stepped out. It burned up from the sand and fell down from the sky. He opened the hood and stared into the belly of the beast. Rusted belts. A crack in the radiator that hadn't been there last week. Dust thick enough to write a prayer into. Hell, he muttered. Not today. He pulled his hat lower, shut the hood, and turned to scan the horizon. Just endless flat land, cacti, scrub brush, and a distant line of ridged hills like the back of some sleeping animal. No movement. Then he saw them. Small figures, 4 of them, children. At first, he thought it was the heat playing games with his vision, a hallucination shaped like people, but they kept walking. They came into focus slowly, like something from a dream too real to disbelieve. The tallest, a boy maybe 8 or 9, held a smaller girl's hand. Behind them trailed 2 younger ones, one with a limp, the other stumbling in the dust. Their clothes hung loose, faded, skin sunburned. No shoes. They didn't look at him right away. Just kept walking, toward nothing, toward nowhere. Luke felt his chest tighten. He took 1 step forward, then stopped. He didn't want this. He didn't want any of this. The last child looked up first, a girl with wild hair and cracked lips. She squinted at him under the brim of his hat, eyes unreadable, empty. She stopped, and the others followed. The older boy positioned himself between them and Luke, his shoulders drawn back, thin arms clenched as if ready to fight off a grown man. Luke lifted his hands, palms out. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice hoarse from the heat. The girl took a step forward. "Do you have water?" Her voice was dry as bone, quiet, not afraid, just tired. He opened the truck door, reached behind the seat, and pulled out the last bottle. He cracked the seal, handed it to the boy first. The boy hesitated, then took it, letting each child have 1 small sip before passing it back. No one asked who he was. No one said thank you. It was survival. Nothing else. "Where's your family?" Luke asked. Silence. The boy's jaw tightened. "Mama left us at a gas station. She said she'd be back." "How long ago?" 3 days. Luke felt something shift inside him. A weight, not new but heavier now. Something in the way the boy said it, without emotion, without hope, cut deeper than any scream. His first instinct was to get back in the truck and drive off. Or at least try to. Pretend he hadn't seen them. Pretend this wasn't now part of his story. But the girl was watching him. Not pleading. Just watching. Like she was measuring whether he'd leave them there to die. Luke looked away. He had lost his daughter 3 years ago. Fire, smoke, a shattered window. A mistaken judgment. His wife had died trying to get to her. He'd come out with burns on his arms, scars no one could see, and a soul too mangled to patch back up. Since then, he'd lived in the quietest corner of Willow Creek, fixing nothing. Calling no one, answering only to silence. But these kids, were not a memory. They were real. He sighed, wiped sweat from his brow. "Get in the truck." The boy narrowed his eyes. "Why?" "I'm not leaving you out here," Luke said flatly. Take it or leave it." The kids climbed into the cab without another word. The girl with the cracked lips curled into the corner and closed her eyes. The youngest one leaned against the door and began to cry, barely audible. Luke didn't ask their names. He slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The truck sputtered, protested, but then, by some small miracle, came to life. They drove slowly. Dust kicked up behind the tires, curling into a pale ribbon in the wind. No one spoke. Luke kept his eyes on the road, but part of him drifted. 3 years of silence. 3 years of nothing but the sound of his own footsteps on worn floorboards. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know why he wasn't turning toward the sheriff's station or the county shelter. He only knew that when he looked in the rearview mirror and saw those kids half asleep against one another, he couldn't let them go. As the town appeared in the distance, just a few rooftops, a church steeple, and the leaning mailbox of his old driveway, Luke thought about the house, the empty kitchen, the covered table in the garage, and for the first time in a very long time, something inside him whispered, "Maybe you don't have to stay broken." The screen door creaked open, then slammed shut with the kind of sound that used to mean someone was home. Luke hadn't heard that sound in nearly 3 years. He held it open for the last child, June, the smallest, who clung to his hand with all the trust of someone who had no other choice. The house was quiet, still smelled faintly of dry wood, and something older, like time itself, had thickened in the walls. The curtains were half drawn, keeping the heat out but letting in just enough light to see the shape of things. The long hallway, the dusty floorboards, the muted colors of furniture, untouched for too long. "Shoes off," Luke said, not knowing why. The kids obeyed without a word. He led them into the front room. A couch sagged in the middle. One of the cushions had a tear that Claire used to say she'd fix. A small bookshelf leaned near the fireplace, the books faded from the sun and neglect. They stood there awkwardly, all 4 of them bunched together, like sheep in a storm, waiting for something to happen. Luke scratched the back of his neck. "You can sit." They didn't. He sighed and walked into the kitchen. The fridge hummed like an old man sleeping. He pulled out a can of soup, dented at the side, and set it on the counter. Found a pot, rinsed off some dust. The faucet stuttered before giving up a stream of warm, iron-tasting water. He stirred the soup with the same wooden spoon Claire used to use, chipped on one side from when their daughter dropped it trying to help stir pancake batter. He closed his eyes for a second too long. Don't go there. The soup began to bubble. He ladled it into 4 mismatched bowls, grabbed a sleeve of saltine, crackers, and carried everything back to the front room, still standing. All 4. "You can sit now," he said again, quieter. They sat. He handed out bowls. Sam, the oldest, took his first, but didn't eat. He waited until the others had theirs. Luke noted that quiet leadership, or maybe just the memory of too many times when he didn't get his share. Ellie dipped a cracker in the soup and bit off the corner. She didn't look at Luke, but she didn't avoid him either. Noah, who hadn't spoken a word since Luke picked them up, blew on his spoon before tasting. June needed help, so Luke knelt beside her, gently holding her hand as she fumbled the spoon into the bowl. "Hot," she whispered. "I know," he said softly. "Take your time." They ate in near silence, save for the soft clinking of spoons against ceramic and the crackle of plastic from the saltine wrapper. Luke sat on the armrest of the couch, watching. He didn't eat. He didn't know what this was. This wasn't charity. He didn't do charity. He hadn't given so much as a nod to his neighbors in months. This wasn't rescuing. That word belonged to another life, before the fire, before the blackened hole in his chest where a future used to be. So what was it? He watched the smallest girl eat 1 cracker, then press her head against the side of the couch and fall asleep with the bowl still balanced on her lap. He rose and took it gently from her hands, set it on the floor, and draped a throw blanket, still smelling faintly of lemon and dust, over her tiny body. Then he walked to the hall closet and pulled out the old folding cot, creaky but functional. He set it up by the front window, then another, then a third. The last one he didn't have, so he laid out blankets on the rug. The children watched him move, wordless. It was only when he brought out a fifth cot, without thinking, that he caught himself. There used to be 5: Claire, Emily, and the dog, Rosie. All gone, just him now and now them. I only have 4, he muttered. It's okay, Sam said. I'll sleep on the floor. Luke didn't argue. The kid sounded like he'd done it before. After the room was settled, Luke stood in the doorway and surveyed the space. His space, now invaded by 4 small bodies and the echo of something he'd forgotten. Purpose. He didn't know if this was a good idea. He didn't even know what he'd do in the morning. He just knew that when he looked around, the silence didn't seem quite so heavy. Later that night, Luke sat alone in the kitchen. The overhead light buzzed softly, illuminating dust in the air like snow that never fell. He poured himself a cup of stale coffee and opened the side door that led to the garage. There it was. The table, covered in a blue tarp, one leg broken off, leaning like a tired soldier. Claire used to oil it once a month. It was made from old pine, soft enough to nick but sturdy enough to last. They'd eaten every family dinner at that table. Sunday waffles, Christmas ham, spaghetti Thursdays. He touched the edge, ran his hand over the grain. His fingers paused, at a scratch, a small heart carved into the wood, barely visible now. He remembered the night Claire did that while Emily laughed and begged to do one too. He sat there a long time, not crying, not feeling much of anything, except the faintest tremor of something waking up inside him, something he didn't dare name. Back inside, Sam was still awake, sitting up on the cot with his knees hugged to his chest. Luke paused in the doorway. You need something? Sam shook his head. Then, after a moment, why'd you help us? Luke didn't answer right away. The coffee in his hand was cold, his mouth felt dry. He looked at the boy. Really looked. Didn't feel like leaving you there, he said. Sam studied him for a second, then nodded. He lay down, pulled the blanket up, and turned his face toward the wall. Luke turned off the light. The hallway stretched long and dark ahead of him, and for the first time in 3 years, it didn't feel quite so empty. The morning came quietly. Luke awoke before the sun, as he always did. Years of habit, some from his time as a contractor, most from grief. Sleep had never returned to him the same way after the fire. Now it came in short, shallow bursts, like a guest who never stayed long, enough to be useful. The house was still but not silent. There were new sounds now. Breathing, soft rustling, the tiny creak of a cot as one of the kids turned in their sleep. It should have made him uneasy. It didn't. Not exactly. Luke moved into the kitchen, started the coffee pot. The same one Claire used to say needed replacing, but he never did. Now it wheezed and sputtered to life with a kind of familiar protest. He stood by the window, mug in hand, watching the sky turn from purple to gray. Then he heard it. A whisper of sound from the garage. Something light, like dragging cloth, or a footstep too small to make noise. He set the mug down and stepped carefully to the back hallway where the garage door stood ajar. He eased it open, and there she was. Ellie, 6, maybe 7. Her knees tucked beneath her dress, barefoot, sitting cross-legged beneath the old pine table, a piece of chalk clutched in one hand. The morning light spilled in through the high window, casting angled beams that caught her hair and the tiny particles of dust dancing around her. She was drawing. Luke didn't speak. He watched. Her hand moved with care, not fear. She sketched a small house, smoke curling from a chimney, a tree next to it, 4 little stick-figure children, and 1 tall figure beside them. Luke's throat tightened. It wasn't the drawing. It wasn't even that she'd chosen the floor beneath the broken table to make it. It was the placement of the 5th figure, not in front, not behind, beside them. He cleared his throat softly. Ellie, startled, looked up at him. Her eyes weren't afraid, but she froze like she expected to be scolded. Sorry, she whispered. I didn't know where else to sit. Luke stepped into the garage, looked at the table. Its broken leg had collapsed further, dust-coated, its surface save for the area she had wiped clean with her sleeve. "You like drawing?" he asked. She shrugged. He lowered himself beside her, joints stiff with age and disuse. The cold of the concrete seeped through his jeans. Ellie pointed to the stick figures. "That's us," she said. "That's Sam and Noah and June. That's me." She hesitated before tapping the fifth figure. "And that's you, I guess." Luke stared at the image. A part of him wanted to correct her, to say he wasn't their anything, not their dad, not their guardian. Just a man who happened to be there when no one else was. But he didn't. Instead, he asked, "Where's your mom?" Ellie looked down. "She went away." "Do you know where?" She shook her head. Luke nodded, said nothing more. He watched her draw a tiny square next to the chimney. "What's that?" "A window." "For what?" Ellie thought for a second. "So we know if the light is on." Luke felt something move in his chest, like a gear that hadn't turned in, a long time trying to shift. Later that day, Luke dragged the table from the garage into the house. Sam followed him without asking why, then helped steady it as Luke propped it on wooden crates. Noah watched from the couch holding a toy truck someone had left behind years ago. June toddled after them, holding a spoon. Ellie smiled as the table settled into the middle of the kitchen, where it used to be. Luke stared at it, hands on his hips. It looked out of place. Not because it didn't belong, but because it hadn't been there in so long. Like seeing an old photograph come to life. The leg was still broken. He'd need to fix it. The surface was scratched, uneven. He ran his hand over it, felt the nicks and gouges. Memories flooded back. Emily had carved her initials once. Claire had yelled, but only half-heartedly. Then she added hers beside it. Then Luke did too. He hadn't touched it since. He wondered if the kids could sense that, if they could feel the history etched into the wood. "Can we eat here tonight?" Ellie asked. Luke looked at her. The question wasn't small. It came wrapped in hope, folded in fear. A test, maybe. Or a wish. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Yeah, we can." That evening, Luke made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Not much, but warm. Filling. They sat around the table, all five of them. Luke at one end, Sam at the other. The others bunched, in the middle like birds on a wire. Nobody talked much, but there was something sacred about the quiet. Not heavy. Just real. Luke watched as Noah dipped his sandwich into his soup, grinned when it fell apart. Ellie giggled. Even Sam smiled. Barely. Luke looked at them, then at the table. It had seen years of family life, and then years of silence. And now, somehow, both at once. His hand found the old initials carved near the edge, C-L-E. He ran his thumb over them slowly. Then, without thinking, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his pocket knife, and added a new one. He didn't say what it meant. He didn't have to. That night, as the kids brushed their teeth and settled into cots again, Luke walked out to the back porch. The stars above Willow Creek looked like someone had spilled a handful of salt over black velvet. He closed his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't dread it. Inside, the table stood quietly, holding the weight of 5 bowls, a chipped salt shaker, and a memory being rewritten. The knock came just before dusk. Luke was in the kitchen, rinsing, dishes listening to the wind pick up across the hills outside. Dust scraped gently against the windows. The smell of a distant storm hung in the air, ozone and sagebrush, dry earth waiting to break. He paused. 1 knock. Then 2 more, spaced apart. Not urgent, not afraid. Just hesitant. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, glanced toward the front, room where the kids were sprawled out. June asleep, Ellie humming softly while drawing with Noah, Sam reading an old comic Luke didn't even know he still had. Luke walked slowly to the door. When he opened it, he didn't speak. She stood there, barefoot, dust coating her dress like soot. Hair tangled, knotted around her face. In one arm, she held June's tattered blanket. In the other, nothing, not even a bag. Her eyes met his. Gray-green, sharp, but exhausted. Like she'd been looking at the horizon too long. "You have them," she said. Luke didn't answer. A gust of wind stirred the porch dust around her ankles. "I thought maybe they'd come here," she continued. "Someone at the gas station said a man in an old blue truck picked up 4 kids. I knew it had to be you." He stayed in the doorway, unmoving. "They're okay?" she asked, voice quieter now. "Are they hurt?" "They're fine, and I..." Exhaled, a full breath, like she hadn't let herself breathe in days. Luke studied her. She was younger than he expected, maybe early 30s. There was beauty beneath the dirt and weariness, but it wasn't soft. It was the kind that came from enduring things, from not breaking when it would have been easier to. "I didn't abandon them," she said. "I swear to God I didn't." Luke still hadn't said a word. She stepped closer. Not onto the porch. She kept a respectful distance, as if aware she was still outside the line of trust. "I had to go," she said. "Their father, my ex, he showed up. I thought he was in jail. He wasn't. He found me at the station. He said he'd take them, that I'd never see them again." Her voice cracked. "So I ran. I had nothing. No phone, no car. Just this." She held up June's blanket, as if that explained everything. Luke finally spoke. 3 days. She flinched. "Yes." He folded his arms. "They were alone for 3 days. I know." And they walked. In the heat. With no water. Tears welled up, but she didn't let them fall. "I left a note. I did. I swear. I told them I'd come back. I couldn't get to them. I tried. No one would help. I begged." Luke didn't move. Didn't soften. But something behind his ribs was shifting. He had seen liars before. He'd lived through betrayal. Heard false apologies whispered like lullabies. But this didn't feel rehearsed. It felt ragged. Unfiltered. Real. Still, truth didn't always equal trust. He stepped back, opened the door wider. "You hungry?" She blinked, then nodded. He motioned her inside. When Marianne stepped into the house, it was like the wind itself changed. The kids looked up in unison. June gasped. "Mama!" Marianne dropped the blanket, dropped everything, and fell to her knees as June ran into her arms. Ellie was next, then Noah. Sam didn't move right away. He stood still, frozen, like he was waiting for her to disappear. Marianne reached for him. He let her. That moment, silent and shaking, lasted longer than it needed to. Luke didn't interrupt. When they finally let go, Marianne sat on the floor, all 4 kids wrapped around her like roots returning to a tree. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." June tugged her sleeve. "I kept your blanket warm." Marianne laughed, then cried. The kind of crying that made no noise but soaked into a person's shoulders. Luke turned away. Later, after the kids had settled down and the living room was full of low conversation and the occasional burst of laughter, Luke stood in the doorway, to the kitchen watching Marianne wash her hands at the sink. "I don't know what to say," she said. "You don't need to say anything." She turned off the faucet, dried her hands. "I know this isn't your problem. You didn't ask for any of this, but thank you." Luke nodded once. Marianne leaned against the counter, looking at the window over the sink. "I can go tomorrow," she said quietly. "Just let me stay the night. One night. Then I'll figure it out." Luke didn't answer right away. He looked at the living room, the kids curled on the couch, warm and safe. He thought of the garage, the table, the initials, carved into pine, the memory of someone who used to say, "We don't leave people behind." He sighed. "You can stay." Marianne turned to him. "Are you sure?" No. It was the most honest thing he could offer, but it was enough. That night, Luke lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slow circles in the dim light. He didn't know what he'd just done. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know if she was safe, if she'd stay, if he'd regret it tomorrow. All he knew was this. The silence he'd built around himself was starting to crack. And for the first time, he wasn't rushing to seal it shut. Luke found her in the garage just after sunrise. She was barefoot, crouched beside the broken table, sleeves rolled up, fingertips running gently over the worn edge like it was something sacred. A strand of hair had slipped free and curled near her jaw, catching a sliver of sunlight that made her look younger than she had the night before. He didn't say anything. Not at first. Marianne looked up when she felt his shadow stretch across the floor. "I didn't mean to go poking around," she said. "I was looking for a hammer. Thought maybe I'd fix the chair Noah nearly broke this morning." Luke leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "It's not poking around if the door's open." She smiled faintly. "Still feels like trespassing." Silence passed between them. Familiar now. Not empty, not uncomfortable. Just room to breathe. Luke stepped forward, pulled the tarp back the rest of the way. The table looked worse in the daylight. One leg hung loose, dangling by a bent screw. The surface was dull and cracked, stained by years and something deeper. It should have been hauled off years ago. He crouched beside her. "I was going to fix it once," he said, "just never got around to it." Marianne nodded, eyes still on the table. "Looks like it mattered to someone." It did. Another pause. Then quietly she asked, "Her?" Luke nodded. "Claire, my wife." "I figured." He didn't offer more. She didn't ask. Instead, she reached for a small wrench from the nearby toolbox and held it up like a peace offering. "Want to try now?" They worked mostly in silence. Luke held the leg steady while Marianne tightened bolts, her hands quick and precise. She wasn't afraid to get dirty. She knelt in the sawdust, wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her arm, and moved like someone used to fixing what's broken, even when it wasn't hers to fix. "You've done this before," he said. "My dad was a carpenter," she replied. "When he was sober." Luke handed her a clamp. "And when he wasn't?" "I taught myself." They exchanged a brief glance, one built of shared histories and splinters that had healed crooked. He reached for a chisel, tested its edge against the light. Dull. Useless. "Should have sharpened this years ago," he muttered. Marianne shrugged. "We make do." She said it like a truth she'd lived more than once. By noon, the leg stood strong again. Luke pressed down on the tabletop, testing the weight. "Still wobbles a bit." Marianne smirked. "So do I." He chuckled, despite himself. She brushed her palms off on her jeans, looked around. "You know, you could sand this down, oil it up, get a few more years out of it." Luke looked at the table. At the place where Claire once lit birthday candles, where Emily spilled juice boxes, where Sunday morning smelled like maple syrup and old hymns on the radio. "It's not just wood," he said softly. "I know." And she did. He could see it in her face. "It was the last thing I pulled out of the house after the fire," he said. "Everything else was too far gone, but this—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Marianne stepped back, hands on hips. "Then maybe it's time to give it a second life." He looked at her. Really looked. The lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the kindness in her hands, the way she stood like someone bracing for another blow and yet still offered help. "You don't have to fix things that aren't yours," he said. She met his gaze. "Neither do you." And just like that, something settled between them. Not resolved. Not healed, but steadied. Like a table with all four legs on the floor again. Later, the kids came in to see what all the noise was. June ran her hand along the sanded edge. "It's soft," Ellie gasped. "You fixed it." Noah looked up at Luke. "Can we eat here again?" Luke nodded. "That's the idea." Sam didn't say anything, but he set down the book he was reading and walked around the table, checking the leg like a foreman. "You did good," he said finally. Luke smiled. "I had help. The kitchen felt different that day. Not just because the table was back, but because people were standing around it again, breathing near it, belonging to it. That night, they ate spaghetti. Real spaghetti. Luke had driven into town, bought ground beef, tomato paste, a box of noodles, and even garlic bread. He hadn't cooked for anyone in 3 years. Marianne lit a candle in the center of the table. June clapped. Ellie clinked her fork against her glass like it was a wedding reception. Luke looked around and realized for the first time, no one was missing. No one was being remembered or mourned. Everyone was here, whole. After dinner, as plates were cleared and June fell asleep in her chair, Luke lingered by the table, tracing his finger along the newly sanded edge. Marianne came beside him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Thank you," she said. "For dinner?" "For today." He nodded, unsure how to answer. She started to walk away, then paused. "Luke?" He looked at her. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Never mind," she said, and smiled. "Good night." He watched her disappear down the hallway, her silhouette framed by warm lamplight and the hum of children settling in. Luke looked back at the table. Then, without knowing why, he whispered under his breath, "Welcome back." The mornings had settled into a rhythm. Luke woke early, made coffee. Marianne stirred not long after, barefoot in the kitchen, whispering with June while Ellie set the table with unmatched silverware. Sam did the dishes without being asked. Noah chased the dog that wasn't there, giggling through empty hallways. And Luke watched it all unfold like a play he didn't remember auditioning for, but couldn't stop acting in. That morning, Marianne offered to go through the hall closet, make room for blankets, board games, whatever these little tornadoes need. Luke nodded, handed her a flashlight. The closet hadn't been opened in over a year. He didn't think much of it, not until he went to clean up the garage and noticed a manila envelope on the workbench. It wasn't his. It hadn't been there before. Curious, he flipped it open. Inside were documents, worn, wrinkled, but legible. A restraining order. A court transcript. Police. Report battery, domestic assault. Warrant revoked. Case dropped. His hands froze. The name at the top of each form. Marianne Cole. He stood there for a long time. The garage door opened behind him, wind pushing a thin stream of dust across the concrete floor. She hadn't told him everything. Inside, the kids were playing with dominoes on the living room floor. Marianne hummed something under her breath, folding laundry near the table they'd rebuilt together. He walked in, quietly, envelope in hand. She looked up and saw his face before she saw the file. Her smile faltered. "Where did you—" "Garage," Luke said. "On the bench." She pressed her lips together. "I didn't mean to leave it there." "You meant to hide it, though." Her eyes dropped. He said nothing. Neither did she. The silence between them wasn't peaceful anymore. It was taut, like a rope about to snap. "I wasn't going to lie to you," she said. "I just didn't want that to be the first thing you saw." "It's not the first, but it still matters." Marianne took a breath, sat down at the table. The same table they'd sanded, sealed, and brought back from near ruin. She placed her palms flat on its surface. "I was married to a man named Ray," she said. "I was 19. He was charming, funny, got mean when he drank." Luke leaned against the wall. "He hit you?" She nodded. "The first time he apologized. The second time, he said I made him do it. By the fifth time, I stopped telling anyone." The words weren't rehearsed. They were worn in, like shoes she'd walked too long in. "I tried to leave. The court gave me a temporary order, but the judge was his cousin. Ray talked circles around him and I didn't have a lawyer. The case disappeared." Luke glanced at the papers. "But the kids—" "Sam saw everything. Ellie, too. Noah doesn't remember, thank God. June was just a baby." She swallowed. "I ran last year, moved town to town, tried to keep ahead of him. Luke's voice was low. And now he's close again. Marianne didn't answer. That was an answer. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, felt the scrape of a 3-day beard. The air felt thinner. "I let you in," he said. "I let them in. And now?" "What?" "I understand if you want us gone." That word again. Gone. It lingered. She stood, picked up the envelope, folded it tight. "I'll tell the kids tonight," she said. "We'll leave in the morning." Luke didn't stop her. But when she walked out of the room, the emptiness she left behind wasn't quiet. It was screaming. That night, Luke sat on the back steps of the porch, coffee cold in his hands. The stars overhead flickered against a vast darkness that felt bigger than it had the night before. He thought of Claire. She used to say trust was like carving wood, you couldn't force it. One cut too fast and it splintered. But if you took your time, stayed steady, it could hold the weight of anything. Luke had spent years sanding down the sharp edges of himself. Now he didn't know if he'd let them back in too fast. He didn't know if he could do it again. From inside, he heard soft footsteps. Sam, the boy, sat beside him on the step, knees pulled to his chest. "You mad at Mom?" Sam asked. Luke didn't answer. "She lied," the boy said, like he was trying to make sense of it out loud. Luke finally looked at him. "You know why she lied?" Sam shrugged. "'Cause she didn't want you to send us away." That hit harder than it should have. "I don't want to leave," Sam added. "This is the first place that feels not scary." Luke stared out into the dark. "I'm not mad at her," he said. Sam nodded. Then Luke added, more to himself than anyone, "I'm just scared I can't protect any of you." Sam didn't say anything. He just leaned his shoulder lightly against Luke's arm. And for a long while they sat that way, the boy who had seen too much and the man who had lost too much, letting the silence hold what words couldn't. The sky turned yellow first. Luke had seen enough storms to know when one was coming, but this wasn't a passing gust. It was the kind of sky that made the birds vanish and the wind fall still, the kind that carried more than just weather. He stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching the horizon darken like a bruise. Somewhere beyond, the hills' thunder rolled low and long like a warning whispered too late. Inside, Marianne moved quickly, closing windows, stacking towels near the back door. June clung to her hip. Ellie filled water bottles. Sam and Noah brought in blankets and flashlights. They moved with a rhythm that didn't need instructions, like people who had run before, people who knew how to hide. Luke's hand tightened around the coffee mug. They shouldn't have to know how to do this. He turned to check the locks on the front door. When he stepped inside, Marianne was standing by the table, her knuckles pale against the wood. "He's close," she said. Luke didn't ask how she knew. Some things people feel in their bones. She swallowed hard. "He called the gas station this morning, asked about the kids, described your truck." Luke nodded. "What did the clerk say?" "Nothing." She hung up. "But it means he's tracking us again." A pause. "We should leave tonight," she added. "Before he gets here?" Luke didn't answer right away. His eyes moved across the room, to the cot folded by the couch, to the dish towel still hanging from a hook, to the chalk drawing Ellie had done just yesterday, now framed with tape, on the fridge. "We could stay," he said slowly. Marianne looked at him like she hadn't heard right. Luke met her eyes. "We make a plan, we call Sheriff Hill, we stand our ground." Her face twisted, half grateful, half terrified. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I'm doing it." The wind arrived in waves, slamming against the house like a fist wrapped in sand. The kids stayed close to the living room. Marianne gathered them on the floor, reading softly from an old children's book she'd found on the shelf. Her voice trembled but held steady. Luke stood by the front door, shotgun leaning behind him. He hadn't fired it in years. He didn't even know if it was still legal. But it was clean, loaded, ready. The sky cracked open with a flash of lightning. Thunder chased it louder now. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps, like a command. Luke didn't move. He knew that rhythm, not from memory but from instinct, from the way blood rushes to your ears when danger wears a human shape. Another knock. This time a voice followed, muffled, drunk slow. "Open the damn door, Marianne." Marianne pulled the kids closer. Sam stood up, shielding his siblings. His hands trembled. Luke stepped toward the door. "Go to the back room," he said. "No." Marianne started. "Go." She hesitated, then obeyed, herding the children into the hallway. The last thing Luke saw was June peeking back at him with wide, wet eyes. The door shook under the next blow. "Open up." Luke didn't. "Don't be stupid, man." The voice slurred. "She's mine. That's my family." Luke stared at the wood between them. Every muscle in his body screamed, not with fear but with something more primal. A memory, maybe, of flames, of sirens, of being too late. Not tonight. He pulled the door open. Ray Cole stood there, taller than Luke expected, broad-shouldered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His shirt was unbuttoned, beer bottle in hand, belt loose at his waist. "You must be the Samaritan," Ray said. Luke didn't speak. Ray looked past him, into the house. "She in there?" Luke stepped forward, blocking the doorway. Ray laughed. "What, you think you're gonna play daddy now? You know how many times she's run? She's like a stray cat, she always crawls back." Luke didn't move. "You're done." Ray's eyes narrowed. "You got a death wish, old man?" Luke's hand shifted slightly, revealing the shotgun beside the door. "I've already lost more than you could ever take from me," Luke said. "And I'm not losing anything else." Ray took a step back. Thunder cracked again, this time directly overhead. A gust of wind caught the porch light, swinging it wildly. For a second, everything held its breath. Then, Ray lunged. Luke caught him mid-charge, the 2 men slamming into the doorframe. The shotgun clattered to the floor. Fists flew. Elbows cracked ribs. Blood spilled from Luke's lip. Ray shoved hard, trying to push inside. In the struggle, the 2 men crashed sideways, straight into the kitchen, straight into the table. The leg gave out first. Then the side panel splintered. The weight of their bodies snapped the whole thing in half, sending it crashing to the ground with a groan like heartbreak. Luke hit the floor hard, back slamming against the tile. Ray raised a fist, but before it could land, a new voice sliced through the room. "Stop." Marianne stood in the doorway, Sam beside her, holding the shotgun with both hands, shaking but steady. Ray turned, sneered. "You won't shoot me." Sam's voice was low. "I won't have to." Behind him, Sheriff Hill appeared, gun drawn, badge glinting. "Step away from the man," the sheriff ordered. Ray froze. "You're trespassing, Ray," Hill said, "and assaulting a homeowner." Ray dropped his hands. It was over. Just like that. After Ray was cuffed and taken away, after the kids were tucked back into makeshift beds and the storm passed over the hills, Luke stood alone in the kitchen. He stared at the wreckage of the table, splintered wood, one leg cracked in 2. He reached down, picked up a broken piece, ran his fingers along the grain. So much work, so much memory, so much meaning. Gone in a second. He sat on the floor back against the cabinet, a smear of dried blood on his cheekbone. Then footsteps approached. Marianne. She knelt beside him, sat without a word. He didn't look at her, didn't need to. She placed her hand on his. It trembled. So did his. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say, only what they would do next. Together. The next morning, Willow Creek smelled like wet earth and new beginnings. Luke stood in the kitchen, barefoot on cool tile, looking at what was left of the table. 2 legs intact, one cracked clean through. The top split across the middle like a wound that hadn't decided whether to heal or scar. Sunlight spilled through the window, brushing across the floor in long golden slants. His body ached from the fight. His lip was swollen, his ribs bruised. But the pain wasn't the loudest thing inside him. It was the silence, the kind that came after surviving. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Marianne. She moved gently like someone still waiting for the floor to fall through. Luke didn't turn around. You sleep? A little. The kids? Still out. He nodded. Together, they looked at the wreckage of the table. It wasn't just furniture. It never had been. It was history. Memory. The last thing he'd tried to save from the fire, and the first thing he'd let anyone else touch since. Marianne reached down, ran her fingers along a splintered edge. We can fix it. Luke hesitated. Might be easier to build something new. She looked at him. That's not what this is about, is it? He met her gaze, and something inside him let go. No, he said. It's not. By mid-morning, word had spread. That's how it worked in Willow Creek. Nobody asked too many questions. But if something broke, people showed up. Sheriff Hill stopped by first. Quiet like always. He brought coffee and a box of donuts from May's diner. No paperwork today, he said, just checking in. Then came May herself, carrying a casserole dish and a small bag of nails. Don't ask, she said, kissing Luke on the cheek. You'll need both. Tommy Ferguson, the retired carpenter who once taught shop class at the high school, arrived an hour later with a toolbox and a lopsided grin. Heard you got in a wrestling match with a table. Luke smirked. Lost too. By noon, there were 6 people in the kitchen. Nobody asked for details. Nobody needed them. They just started working. The kids hovered nearby. Sam held the legs steady while Tommy measured. Ellie sorted screws by size and color, humming to herself. Noah carried scraps out to the porch like a proud little apprentice. June, still too small to help, sat on Luke's lap with a juice box, watching it all like a sacred ritual. The table began to take shape again. They didn't restore it to perfection. They didn't try to hide the scars. They filled the cracks with resin and sanded the edges smooth. Left the grooves and burn marks and initials untouched, a history kept visible. By late afternoon, it stood strong again. Not new, not the same, but honest. When the others had gone, and the kitchen was quiet again, Luke wiped his hands on a towel and looked around. Marianne stood across the table, her face streaked with sawdust and sweat, hair pinned up messily, eyes tired, but clear. It's beautiful, she said. It's real, he replied. Ellie stepped forward, holding a small, wooden plaque she'd painted while no one was watching. She placed it gently in the center of the table. Block letters in bright red read, "This is where we stay." Luke stared at it. He tried to speak, but couldn't. Marianne brushed her hand across the edge of the table. "We'll understand if it's too much," she said softly. "If you'd rather we—" "No," Luke interrupted. Everyone looked up. He exhaled slowly. "You don't go. Not unless you want to." Sam straightened. Ellie smiled. Noah gave a quiet, yes, and hugged. Luke around the waist, even June clapped, though she probably didn't know why. That evening, they ate dinner around the table again. Homemade chili. Store-bought cornbread. Paper napkins and mismatched bowls. It didn't matter. What mattered was the way Sam told a joke and Marianne rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. The way Ellie leaned against Luke's arm like it was something she'd always done. The way Noah passed the butter without being asked. The way June laughed, noodles on her chin. The way Luke looked around and didn't feel like a guest in his own house. Not anymore. After dinner, Marianne stayed to do dishes. Luke went out back. The air was cooler now. Crisp. Somewhere between summer and fall. He stood in the yard, staring at the tree stump that used to hold Claire's favorite bird feeder. Wind moved gently through the tall grass, carrying a whisper of what had been, and what might still be. Behind him, the door opened. Ellie tiptoed out, holding a small potted sapling. "We bought it yesterday," she said. "Me and Sam." Luke looked at the sapling. A little oak, leaves still trembling, roots still fresh. "We wanted to plant something," she said. Mom said it helps. Starting new things. Luke crouched down, helped her dig a small hole. They placed the sapling gently, pressed earth around its roots. When they finished, Ellie stood back and whispered, "We call it the promise tree." Luke looked at her. She smiled shyly. "'Cause we're staying, and we want it to grow up with us." He didn't say anything, just pulled her close and hugged her. Tight. Not because she needed it, but because he did. Later that night, long after the house had quieted, Luke sat at the rebuilt table, alone in the glow of the overhead light. The plaque still sat at the center. "This is where we stay." He traced the words with one hand, then reached beneath the table. Carved, hidden, old and worn, were the initials he and Claire had once etched. C+L+E. Below them, Luke carved a new set of letters, SENJM. He leaned back, ran his fingers across the fresh grain, and finally let himself breathe. The house smelled like butter and thyme. It had been a long time since Luke's kitchen held, the scent of something cooking slow. Most meals before the kids were quick, efficient, forgettable. Sandwiches, canned soup, black coffee gone cold. But tonight was different. Tonight, Marianne made roast chicken the way her grandmother taught her, rubbing herbs under the skin, adding slices of lemon and garlic. Ellie peeled carrots, her small hands slick with orange juice. Sam mashed potatoes with too much salt, laughing every time he tasted them, just to check. Noah carried napkins one by one, very seriously. June dropped a spoon and giggled like she'd just invented comedy. Luke stood at the stove stirring. Gravy stealing glances across the kitchen, not because he needed to check on them, but because he couldn't believe it was all really happening. The hum of the house had changed. No longer empty. No longer haunted. It pulsed now with low conversation, the scrape of chairs, the soft thud of feet, and laughter that hadn't echoed off these walls in years. Luke found himself smiling. Not the kind of smile you put on for strangers. The kind that slips in when you're not looking. The table was set with mismatched plates and chipped cups. A blue candle flickered in the center, sitting in an old jelly jar. They didn't wait for a blessing. They didn't need one. They were the blessing. They passed bowls around, served one another, asked if anyone wanted seconds before taking their own. June held up a spoonful of mashed potatoes and declared, "This is fluffy." Everyone laughed, including Luke. He didn't remember the last time he laughed over dinner. Not like that. Not where it felt like his ribs might crack, not from pain, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of joy. Ellie leaned her head against his arm. "Best dinner ever," she whispered. Luke swallowed hard. He nodded. When the plates were mostly empty and the air was thick with warmth, Luke stood up, holding his glass. Just water, but somehow it felt like more. He looked around the table, at Sam, who still sat like he was waiting for someone to yank it all away. At Ellie, who had already started doodling on her napkin with a purple crayon. At Noah, who rested his head sleepily on his folded arms. At June, who was humming to herself, rocking gently in her chair. At Marianne, who met his eyes across the candlelight and gave the smallest nod. He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, almost unsure of itself. Everyone turned to listen. "I lost a lot," he began. "Before this, my wife, my daughter, myself, I guess." The words came out slower than he meant, but they came, and for a long time I figured that was it, that I'd used up whatever good I was allowed to have, that the rest of my life was just going to be leftovers. He paused. No one moved. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. "But then I found you kids," he said. "And you showed up, Marianne, and somehow I started waking up again." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't think I could love anything again. I didn't think I should. But," he looked back up, "I do." Marianne's eyes shimmered. She didn't speak, she didn't have to. "I don't know what happens next," Luke added. "I don't have a plan, but I know this. If you'll let me, I want to stay. I want to try. The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Then June clapped, just once, loudly. Everyone laughed again, tears now mixed with smiles. Sam nodded solemnly. We were going to ask if we could stay anyway. Yeah, Ellie said, grinning. You're not getting rid of us that easy. Luke laughed. A real one. The kind that rumbles out and feels strange in your throat after years of disuse. Marianne reached across the table. He met her halfway. Their fingers brushed. Held, no promises, no declarations, just a choice. Made again, and again, and again. After dinner, the kids drifted toward sleep. Sam stayed up to read by flashlight. Noah snored softly on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled like old cedar. June curled into Marianne's side. Ellie asked if she could keep the purple crayon under her pillow. For dreams. Luke walked into the kitchen, started rinsing dishes. Marianne joined him. They worked side by side in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Plates stacked, glasses clinked, and warm water steamed between their hands. Luke dried the last bowl and set it aside. Marianne turned off the faucet. He looked at her. She stepped closer. Thank you, she said softly. For dinner? For not giving up. On us. He shook his head. You gave me more than I ever gave you. That's not how it works. He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know what this is yet, he said, but I want to find out. She smiled, eyes glassy, voice barely above a whisper. So do I. That night, Luke sat again at the table, alone this time. Just him and the candle, now burned low, flickering against the rim of the jelly jar. He looked. Around, same walls, same floorboards, same window where Claire once stood laughing at the snow. But everything was different. Because now, love had found its way back in, not loudly, not with fanfare. Quietly, like roots growing beneath the soil. Like the smell of roast chicken in a house that forgot how to be hungry. Like the weight of a small hand finding yours under the table, when you didn't even realize you were reaching. The ground was soft from last week's rain. Luke knelt beside the small oak sapling in the backyard, his jeans damp at the knees. The morning air held a cool bite, the kind that hinted fall was coming, not all at once, but gently, like an old friend, returning from a long absence. The tree was still there, still standing. Its thin trunk swayed a little in the breeze, but the roots were holding. He pressed the soil around the base, patting it down gently with both hands, then sat back on his heels. Above him, the sky stretched wide and unhurried. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Ellie stepped out barefoot, wearing one of Marianne's old sweaters that hung off her shoulders like a blanket. You checking on it again? She asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Just making sure it's still growing. She walked over and crouched beside him. It's not going anywhere. Luke looked at her. How can you tell? She pointed to the lowest branch. There's a new leaf. He squinted. She was right. Tiny, bright, fragile as a breath. But real. Ellie sat cross-legged in the grass, picking at clover. You think it'll be big someday? She asked. Luke nodded. If we take care of it. She was quiet for a second. Can we carve our initials in it someday? Like the table? Luke smiled. Let's let it grow a little first. She grinned and got up, running back toward the house. Luke stayed behind. Let the breeze wrap around him, let the silence speak. Inside, the house was slowly waking. June's giggles bounced down the hallway. Sam was helping Marianne pack lunches for school, grumbling good-naturedly about too many vegetables. Noah danced in the living room with the radio on, socks sliding across wood. It wasn't chaos. It was life. Luke leaned against the doorway, watching it unfold. He still hadn't gotten used to it, not entirely. Sometimes it caught him off guard, the way a laugh would sneak up on him, or the weight of a small head on his shoulder during a movie. But the surprise was no longer fear. It was gratitude, pure and unpolished. He walked into the kitchen. Marianne handed him a slice of toast, eyes soft. "They're yours now too, you know." Luke looked at her. "I know," he said, and he did. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every mismatched sock and whispered nightmare, he didn't just tend to them now. He chose them. That afternoon, Sam helped him move the old chairs from the garage onto the back porch. They sanded the flaking paint and retightened the screws. "This one's wobbly," Sam said. Luke tested the leg. "We'll brace it." "We could just toss it," Sam offered. Luke looked at the chair, then at the boy. "Nah," he said. "We fix things around here." Sam nodded. That meant something. When evening came, the family gathered at the table again, this time with no occasion, no storm, no reason but the day itself. Spaghetti, store-bought bread, sweet tea in mason jars. Ellie told a story that made no sense but had everyone laughing. June dipped her bread in her water and declared it juicy toast. Sam rolled his eyes. Marianne kissed the top of Noah's head as she passed the salt. Luke sat back, taking it all in. He ran his hand along the table. His table, their table. The surface still held the scars. Grooves from toys, stains from tea, initials carved with careful hands. But none of it needed covering. Every mark told a story worth keeping. After dinner, Luke stepped outside with a fresh mug of coffee and stood by the oak tree. The moon was low, half hidden by clouds, and the porch light cast long shadows across the yard. Marianne joined him a minute later, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. They didn't speak at first, didn't need to. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you ever miss it?" He looked at her. "What?" "Before," Luke thought, then shook his head. "I miss the people, not the silence." She nodded slowly. "Yeah." They stood there together, watching the tree. After a moment, Marianne reached for his hand. He took it, warm, solid, familiar now. "I don't know what forever looks like," she whispered. Luke looked down at their fingers interlocked, then at the tree. The wind rustled its leaves gently. He squeezed her hand. "Neither do I," he said. "But I know this." She turned toward him. "I'm here tomorrow, and the day after that." He paused, then added softly, "We don't have to promise forever. We just choose each other. Every day." Inside, the children's laughter faded to hush. The candle on the table flickered out. The oak tree in the yard, roots settling deeper, reached silently toward the stars. And Luke, for the first time in a very long time, didn't feel like he was starting over. He felt like he'd finally come home. If this story stayed with you, even just a little, give it a like, and subscribe for more moments that remind us we're never too lost to be found. Sometimes, healing begins with simply choosing to stay.